Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. As always, before we start, I do have to plug our Patreon. I'm going to keep it real quick so we can get into today's episode. So if you enjoy what we do, please pop over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast. The biggest, reward you get for signing up is not only supporting the show, but you get access to the entire back catalogue, which is 260 episodes that you can't get anywhere else, with some absolutely amazing guests. If you can't support on Patreon, a 5-star rating, positive review wherever you do get your podcast, and then maybe someone else will find the show, and a like and subscribe on YouTube. But with that said, let's get into today's show. I'm really excited to speak to this gentleman, and we're very lucky to have him join us. So first, I would like to introduce my in-house archaeologist and co-host, said it the wrong way around this time for some reason, Mags Havgar.
Hello, I'm equally excited about today's guest. Go ahead and introduce Dan. It's going to be exciting.
So today's guest is Gísli Sigurðsson, who is a research professor at the Árni Magnússon Institute, University of Iceland, and has served as a visiting professor in Winnipeg, Stavanger, and Berkeley. Gísli has curated exhibitions, edited multiple works, included a complete annotated edition of the Poetic Edda, of the Eddic poetry, and published several books and Icelandic oral traditions and sagas. Does that cover everything? I'm sure it's...
Yeah, roughly.
Some of it.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Thank
you for having me. Yeah.
You're welcome. We spoke to Ryan not so long ago, who did an amazing episode for us on the astrology.
No, the N one.
I'm so bad with astronomy.
There you go.
But the thing is that it's only in recent times, so that is for us medievalists, that astrology and astronomy become separated. So.
Oh, okay.
So the living mythology or mythological terminology about the sky is a mixture of what we now call astrology and astronomy.
See, you're just an old soul, Dan. That's why I can't keep track.
A medieval soul.
So I just warn you, when I talk about something recent, I'm not talking about the last few months or not even years.
Yeah.
Yes.
Last century, couple centuries.
Or millennia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, or millennia.
So today we're going to look at the Gaelic influences in Iceland, and then the oral and memory traditions of Iceland. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was suggesting that we might focus on that, and the idea of the first question that everyone asks coming to this literature: why is this all coming out of Iceland? These literary texts, the Eddas, the mythological sources, as we used to call them, the poems and the prose associated with Snorri in Snorri's Edda, called the Prose Edda, the Younger Edda, all the same work, different names. And then the Poetic Edda that you mentioned earlier, and that is often used just as a term for one single manuscript from the late 13th century, the Codex Regius of the Elder Edda. But there are more poems that we use the umbrella of Eddic poetry for. But that single volume is a major single source of this particular poetry, and of course of the mythological poems that we don't find anywhere else. So if it were not for that little unimpressive manuscript, we would know so much more or much less than we actually do.
Crazy how much of a...
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say crazy how much of a difference just a single manuscript can make.
Yeah, that's why we keep that in a sort of special position in our hearts.
Yeah.
This single volume. And then the problem is, of course, and that is what we are dealing with and what we can mention, what is it a source about? what kind of information is it that we are getting from the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda or Snorri's Edda. So, and why is it that this was written in Iceland and not in Scandinavia or the Scandinavian colonies, if we call them that, in the British Isles, or Greenland for that matter. And there is something special in going on in Iceland, and that's why I was suggesting that we could bring up the Gaelic contribution also. That it's not as if just people from Norway emigrated to the island of Iceland and continued with business as usual there during the settlement period in the late 9th and early 10th centuries, so the height of the Viking Age, of course. But rather this is part of expansion going, well, partly to the British Isles, the Faroes, and also expansion east into the Baltic regions and current Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and so on. And the people eventually coming to Iceland and deciding to make that their home are coming both directly from Norway, but also from the colonies in Ireland and Scotland, the Isles, people who are perhaps second generation or children of immigrants there, so they are not coming straight from Norway, even though they may have Norse culture in their mindset. So
the people coming from Ireland, are they going there freely? Because I think I've always heard of that a lot of slaves were taken from Ireland to Iceland.
Yes, that is so. Once we get then down to that part, of course, we don't have any contemporary catalogs that inform us of the exact statistics, but the general image that we have is that Dublin was flourishing, if we can use that word, for a slave market in the 9th century. And by the look of the distribution of silver hoards around Dublin, it looks as if they were not all just captured by the Norse, but perhaps also traded. And the Irish were taking part in the business as with a business model that we later saw in West Africa, where Europeans would bring in arms and get local people to work for them, to capture people into slavery and then sell them to the Europeans that would export them. So again, the terminology is cruel because these were treated as goods at the time and not as people. And the same was happening, it seems, in Ireland, Viking Age Dublin, that they were profiting from the slave market there, and probably these were being sold not only to people who were moving on to Iceland, but some perhaps to other places as well. And because at the time the flow was to Iceland and probably a great demand for workforce there at the time, there are reasons to believe that a reasonable proportion of the slaves ended up in Iceland. But we have these percentages in the modern genealogical DNA studies of the populations of Iceland and the Gaelic area in Ireland, the Isles and Scotland, suggesting that there were much more women of Gaelic genetic background than there were males. So even the current figures are suggesting 60% of the female original population in Iceland had sort of Gaelic genes in them, but only 20% of the males. So how do we explain that?
Yeah, that was my question too, because I was like, how does that make sense? Yeah.
So that Of course, the problem is that in a frontier society, as Iceland would have been, we cannot immediately assume that there were the population was built at 50-50 of males and females.
Yeah.
There may have been much more males and much fewer females,
right,
because that is what happens in a frontier situation. And then only after people start living there and start getting born in the new place, that starts to even out. But even so, this strange figure might suggest that, as I was saying, some of the individuals with Norse genes in them, if we think about them just as gene bearers, not as culture bearers, they could already have married local women in the Gaelic setting in Ireland, Scotland, and so that these women could have come just as free spouses of the males. That is one explanatory model. And then, of course, they could also have been taken into slavery as well in a higher percentage. We just don't know the figures there, or how this was. Also, we don't know how many of the original population or immigrants in Iceland were female. So we all the numbers here are unknown, if you like, and just guesswork. But if we also think of the written sources, or rather written text containing memories of this period in Iceland, and you use a model for the different social classes rather than just taking the information directly, and you think that they are reflecting both the lower classes, the enslaved individuals, as well as the upper class individuals that are, of course, much more likely to get mentioned or remembered in the text. So if you throw the information into a class model where most people would be of the lower classes, and fewer and fewer as you go higher up, then you can squeeze the number of Gaelic people with Gaelic origins up to 40%, according to the written sources.
Okay.
But that is manipulating with the evidence a bit. And that is also by taking all the insecure votes, if you like, and throw them on the Gaelic ticket. And if you throw them all on the Norse ticket, then it goes down to 30%. So the written sources, it can be argued, are reflecting a 30 to 40% contribution of the Gaelic, of people with the Gaelic origins.
That's a big number. Either way, 30 or 40.
So that is the point. It's already a substantial contribution that can, I think, go a long way to explain the different mentality of the cultures in Iceland. People get in new ideas, new ways of thinking that are bound to come not only with people carrying these genes, because genes, of course, don't carry culture, but people coming from that part of the world as opposed to coming from Norway.
Yeah.
So there is a mixed culture already. So now we have the term multiculturalism that we are applying in today, and that is clearly what was going on in Iceland in the during the Viking Age. People are coming from different cultural backgrounds, establishing a culture in a new virgin territory where there was no other native population. And they create something new that does not mirror anything that was in the old world.
I think that's such a good thing to keep in mind, because I think it's very easy. There's like this stereotype of thinking that early Iceland was just kind of like a copy and paste of whatever was going on in Scandinavia, particularly Norway at the time. But from the get-go, regardless of which population model you want to use, it seems that, the Gaelic influence was substantial and significant. So right from the get-go, you have an amalgamation going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a very important point to bring up, that much of what we see in the scholarship is based on that model of thinking.
Yeah.
And even it echoes in such a way that people use evidence from Iceland as evidence for what was going on in Norway.
I am very used to that from the archaeological perspective, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah, and I think that model should alert us to think differently.
Yeah.
I've done this podcast for a long time, and every time I feel like I'm getting the hang of this Viking thing, there's someone like you comes along, Gísli, that basically makes me rethink it all, because now I'm wondering how, what influence that 30 or 40% of Gaelic population then has on what's written down, on what's remembered, and what's spread. And bearing in mind that most of what we know about the mythology comes from Icelandic sources, it starts to then open up a lot of doors or little boxes that I thought were closed, and go,
no, it's a can of worms, really.
Yeah, because I guess a lot of archaeological finds, I guess, in Scandinavia, in Britain, are then defined based on what we know from written sources. You put the two together and you apply the story to the image to kind of figure it out. Mm-hmm. But if that image is maybe coming from a mixture, or the stories are coming from a mixture of Nordic and Gaelic, it could be different completely to people who are solely just in, Scandinavia, and have never. I'm really interested. I'm really fascinated. I love this.
I'm glad that you realize immediately that this is the beginning of changing everything.
Yep.
That's why
I'm not going to sleep tonight, Gísli. Now I'm going to be thinking about this.
That's why I wanted to start with that, and then we can take it further. Because as you mentioned, now what has that got to do with what is written much later? Because there are centuries between. And also, it is always assumed, as in the model you just described, that this tradition is very stable. So whatever is written in Iceland in the 13th century reflects on something that we find in Scandinavia from a totally different...
From the 8th century or the 9th century. And it's
so even though it were not for the cultural... mixture that we have in Iceland, and there's a long time and lots of things going on. Christianity is coming, writing is being introduced with lots of learning and ideas and things that get into people's minds and affects what is already there. So this gives us a lot of food for thought, and we have to start rethinking, I think, everything more or less from the very beginning. And so with the first question, why did we start with the Gaelic? And I think first, in order to explain why Iceland is so different, well, there is a different cultural setup already in the country, but what is so different from the what we know from Ireland and Scotland mostly come from the Old Irish sources. That's why we quite often mention just Old Irish, but we assume that some similar cultural features were also in the what we now refer to as the Scottish Isles and even parts of Scotland. The notion of professionalism in poetry, and they had schools for poets and different degrees that poets would graduate with, and they could charge different prices for their poetic production depending on the degree they had completed. So it's so BA, Masters, and a PhD for a Filith, the court, absolutely highest court poet. And so they have and played a role in society, the hierarchy of society, and this notion of professionalism and professional training to become a court poet, which is an important function in an oral culture, to have someone to take care of the memory of what the current ruler, of course, is achieving and what the earlier rulers have achieved, and to keep the stories alive and repeat them and inspire new generations with stories that are always the motivation. Part of the motivation for telling them is also to present the ideal image of individuals with power, how they should behave, what is right and what is wrong, how does a ruler act in this situation and the other. And that is what we see in the royal historiographical texts that we refer to as king sagas about the Norwegian and Danish kings and so on. There is always an idea of the ideal ruler, who is doing it right and who is doing it wrong. And that is what we now associate with Snorri, because Snorri's Heimskringla about the kings of Norway is, of course, the best known collection. And once people realize that this is not just a collection of information, but literary texts told and written for a reason, they have been analyzed for this ideology that Snorri is clearly promoting about royal power in his text. And this is not the first time that stories of that kind are used for that purpose. That is more or less what they are told and remembered for everywhere at all times. And so we just have the written manifestations in Iceland from the time of Snorri.
So, I guess when it comes to stories told in a court by a poet, do you think there would be an emphasis on the smaller details of the story versus the accuracies of the overall, I guess, moral or what you're trying to portray? Because I guess when they do finally get written down, people that then go back and analyze them from a scholarly perspective, you're looking at every little detail. But I'm wondering if it's just the last one that has those little details, whereas each one based on each poet may have changed, but you kept the core the same, but then introduced smaller elements to suit. So how accurate could we find that last one that's written down?
Yeah, it's very tricky. So a tricky question. Accurate about what?
Yeah.
It's that's why I want always to say it's very accurate about how people remember the past.
Okay.
At the time of writing. And so like now we will. You're not perhaps old enough to have grandchildren, but you know grandparents who are telling their young children now stories about their youth. They will focus on everything that was different back then compared to what is now. They will tell stories about how life was without phones, without computers, and then the children don't understand how they had access to the internet if they didn't have these tools. So all the stories that grandparents are telling now all reflect on how different things were back then. But back then, no one was thinking about phones or internet or anything, so this was not an issue. But in the stories, this is turned into an issue because we are telling the story in the present. So the stories are not necessarily reflecting or giving the young of today a full picture of what life was like. They may be not false memories, but they are very limited memories told with perspective and with an agenda in the present.
Yeah.
And this is just a sort of minor example, but if you take that across the whole tradition that is brought forward through the generations, through the ages, with all the information that people have to keep in mind in order just to survive, to learn to live in the land where they live, and to navigate through the sky with the myths, and through the land with the story set there. Then you have this constant rethinking, reshaping, adjusting to the present needs and thinking of the times. And also, if we take it to the mythological level, even though the world view is very stable, there are a lot of new things always happening in the sky. The planets are moving and they are meeting in new locations. And if you apply the mythological terminology to these movements, to the moon and the sun and the planets that we see, always in a new place every evening, then you see that this is not a fixed world of stories with fixed, stable truths. You are getting a new story every night when you go out. Not to mention if you have a hot tub at your residence, as Snorri had in Reykholt, you can stay there all night and look at what is going on. And so it's a mixture of something fixed, something changing, and if you want to get to the kernel of truth, you can say, well, the stories are correct in saying that people from Iceland and the British Isles went out into the Atlantic in the 9th century. We can confirm that with archaeology. They were visiting Iceland already before the 870s, but not with a permanent settlement in mind across the whole country, but here and there they already had their bases. And then we see that there was a swift movement of claiming and living in the entire land after the 870s, as the texts say and as the archaeology tells us. But that doesn't say anything about the truthfulness of the names of individuals or the individual killings or love affairs or what is going on in the texts otherwise. The texts are also correct in remembering that people went from Iceland to Greenland towards the end of the 10th century. But they do not seem to be correct in claiming that they were very pagan, because we don't have any pre-Christian graves that have been found in Greenland. They're all Christian, even from before the year 1000. So it seems as if whoever emigrated from Iceland to Greenland, they were already Christian at the time. And then we also know that people from Iceland and Greenland were on the east coast of North America after the year 1000. And that is also remembered in the texts. But that doesn't tell us that the names of the individuals were exactly as described in the texts. It's not unlikely that people got it right, that Guðríður and Karlsefni were there. But if everything went according to the text is another matter. And the King's Sagas is the same. You have to probably people knew that there were rulers by that name, and they were ruling at a certain period, and some poets, professional poets again, were composing in their time about them. But the details of the poetry and the stories about them are not such that we could compare them with any contemporary historical records if we had them. These are narratives, and we know just from the news of today telling us what happened earlier in the day, they are already turning reality into a narrative. And then you have memories of narratives retold as new stories again and again by generations. So this notion of a kernel of truth is a very tricky one.
Yeah. Because also, what kernel of truth?
Yes.
Like you said earlier, what
Yes.
exactly are we looking for to be truthful or accurate? It all depends on the lens that you're using.
And I think that is that's a very hard thought for historians to come to terms with. But because I have a background in folkloristics, we are perfectly happy with that.
Yeah.
The source is 100% correct as a reflection of the person sharing that story.
Yeah. And it's fine if it isn't 100% reflective of the actual lived reality of centuries worth of culture. That is
we can, before we even start discussing it, we know that it is not a reflection of that. So that is just a given.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever felt. I was gonna say I don't think I've ever felt so sorry for the everyday person who's interested in the Viking Age, because it just feels like there are no set answers to anything, and everything is an open-ended question and a maybe or a possibly, because obviously so many people, when you get into being interested in, let's say, the mythology, you look at the Eddas, and that's where the written sources, it gives something tangible that you can read, and you can be like, this is what they believed. And then it's opened up and it's like, well, actually, no, maybe not. It's probably influenced by by the Gaelic culture. It's got the it's a snapshot in time of who wrote it down and all these other aspects. It's so.
But isn't that the fun part, difficult, though? Because we don't have a time machine, so we have to reinterpret. We have to reinterpret all the time.
I think it's fun for like us who go into it on a deeper level and has that interest. But for people who are just a surface level interest, they must just go, what? No, I'm just gonna believe what's written down. I don't have time to kind of get this deep into it. So that must be hard for scholars as well, to keep battling with that idea, because it's easier to say, I'm just going to believe what's written because that's all I have time to think about. I've got to get back to work.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't be as pessimistic as you are, but we have to get first out of the model of unified pure culture being some stable phenomena.
Yes.
I think so. The multicultural model is the stable model.
Yeah,
it's not as in chess where you begin with all your pieces in so predefined position, and then you start moving. So the world has been moving all along.
Okay, yeah.
So there was never a period where everything was set down and pure and in order, and then started to mingle and influence each other. So there was a constant fluid interaction of ideas and cultures, and so the notion that we are quite often dealing with is that some people think that there was some time in history where there was a stable, pure version of a culture, but that was never the case.
So I can just tell that Dan is just like looking at me a little bit. I'm just sitting here nodding because that's the thing that I've been like repeating for months on this podcast. And Dan's like, "Oh, I know, yes."
Okay, good. And then when we take that and then we say, well, okay, everything is fluid, but then when we start, and that's probably what you were discussing with Ryan also, and if Snorri now. We believe that he is responsible for putting the Edda together as we know it, and in particular the first part after the prologue, Gylfaginning, where the worldview is drawn up for this Swedish king, Gylfi, and he meets a sort of threefold deity that starts explaining to him what the world looks like. And what you see is not really what it appears to be, but rather, and then they go on with their mythological stories that And what they use and what seems to have escaped most of the scholarship is that they are always referring everything to the sky. This huge world tree, white, half transparent, is in the sky. That is the ash of Yggdrasil. And we know in Snorri's time that the names used in Iceland for the planets before the introduction of the classical terminology that we still use, they used the names of the gods that we know from the weekdays for the planets. Now, there was, of course, the sun and the moon, and then Tuesday was Tyr, and Wednesday was Odin's day, and Thursday is Thor's day, and so on. And these are the names used also for the actual planets. That Mars is Tyr, and Jupiter is Thor, and Mercury is Odin, and we don't know what Saturn is, and Venus is, of course, Freya.
How many planets would they
5.
be able to see with
5?
So it's 5. Because obviously, I think for a lot of us, when we're not all, I guess, in Iceland, it's different. You can be out and see the stars as maybe they would have. But a lot of people that live in built-up areas, we just don't get to see the stars in a way that probably most of human history have. It's all light pollution. I remember, like I've said a few times on here, the one time I remember was in Scotland where there was no light pollution and it was a bright night, the stars were out, and it was so overwhelming. It is an absolute core memory for me that me and my friend sat down and just stared upwards, and it was almost like dizzying of just this overwhelming size that I think a lot of people just don't get, but probably would have been an everyday occurrence or near enough in history.
Yeah, this is what occupied the minds of our ancestors once they had the thinking mind. And once they could talk about it, then this is what they were thinking about and what they were talking about, and explaining, trying to figure out what was going on up there. So both this slow daily movement of the entire sky, and then these 5 planets moving, it seems in a much more irregular, but still gradually you figure out how regular it is. But there is still an irregularity in it in terms of how and when and where they meet. And from our human perspective. And then there is the moon and sun that also add a dimension to it. So there are seven moving phenomena in the sky. And then there is the world tree, probably the Milky Way. And all this movement is going on in a belt in the sky that we refer to in amongst the signs of the zodiac, or the houses of the zodiac. That is where all this celestial action is. And all cultures, just globally, they have figured out this system and how this moves and what is stable and the annual movements and so on, except perhaps for modern man with all the light pollution.
I couldn't figure it out, I'll be honest. You could leave me out in the field and I would be...
So it takes time to realize the system. But as I say, all cultures before ours figured this out and used their mythologies to express their findings and observations, and all these stones and old buildings erected in accordance with the calendar and the rising and setting of the sun and the moon and even some of the stars. So this all reflects a very profound knowledge and understanding of what was going on. It's just our problem that we don't have that knowledge or understanding any longer.
But I find that really fascinating that that there has been like a lack in the scholarship of connecting the connection with the sky, considering how not that for example, Greek mythology is necessarily comparable to Norse mythology, but in the scholarship of Greek mythology, there's absolutely an understanding of the connection with, people for centuries having an insane awareness of the night sky above them. So it's just fascinating that for some reason there's been a gap there in the study of Norse mythology.
Yeah. Of course, the Greek terminology is what we live with today. So we
exactly.
still have, so that's why we know what they are referring to. The problem with the Norse is that we don't know what they are talking about, except for the world tree, which is still an interpretation. It doesn't tell us that it's the Milky Way, and the planets. We know that the names of the planets are the names of the gods. So in Snorri's time, again, that is a problem. Was that the same in pre-Christian times?
Yeah.
And then we can say, well, the vocabulary was the same. People had the same words for water, sea, land, mountains, and so on. And they had the same place names through the ages. So if we start treating the names for phenomena in the sky as place names, and that's where we come to the memory cultural aspect of it, then there is a continuity and stableness in, if you have already named something in front of your eyes, like the sun, you will just continue calling the sun the sun. There's no reason to give it another name. It's always there and always the same name, and there's an interaction between you and the sun every day, and you never forget that it's called the sun. There is never a sort of situation in the culture. Now, what did we call that thing up there? So.
Okay.
And the same applies to the planets. So people have been observing them for ages, and they have a terminology for them. And there's no reason why they should all of a sudden forget that terminology, unless there is a new learned elite that comes and takes over, as is the case when we get the learned astronomy from the Mediterranean, and that takes over the vocabulary about the sky, and the old vocabulary gradually fades out, and of course it was pagan still, but Greco-Roman pagan, and the Catholic Church tried to Christianize the sky as well, because they of course felt bad about all this pagan terminology surviving in talking about the heavens. And in the 17th and 18th centuries, they even produced star maps with Christian terms. So the signs of the zodiac were turned into the different apostles. So there were 12 apostles there, and then the Christian signs were put up for sort of pagan mythological signs. But we all know that did not
didn't quite catch on. No,
didn't stick.
And so we are stuck with the Greco-Roman pagan terminology, and we have forgotten what the Norse pagan terminology or pre-Christian terminology refers to, except, as I say, we have an educated guess about the Milky Way. And then what happens is, and why this doesn't occur to the scholarship, is that ethnoastronomy, as this is referred to now, only really becomes visible and surfaces in the 1980s when NASA and the Smithsonian they organized a conference on ethnoastronomy that was a result of an initiative from the 1960s associated with the landing on the moon, that people started collecting stories globally about the moon. So didn't think there would be much. But as it turned out, there was a whole terminology among all cultures, not only about the moon, but about everything in the sky. So the Smithsonian has the first conference on this in the 1980s, and it took 20 years for the proceedings to be published as Astronomy Across Cultures. in
wow.
2000, a thick volume.
Wow.
So if you read that, you see that every culture has figured this out,
Mhm.
and they
Maybe
have.
it's because-
Sorry.
No, I was going to say maybe it's because people negatively looked back on older cultures as quite primitive,
Mm-hmm.
and the sky has always been like the height of technological advances, especially in the 60s when it's the push, the space race. That is the most advanced humans can ever get, is looking up to the sky. So they probably would have thought, well, these older cultures that are very simple, they're not going to be having this connection to what us modern people are.
Oh, yeah. But I think it's quite the opposite. So, and of course, they were working with another model of the world.
Sure.
So they didn't see us hanging in space on planet Earth, but rather the sky was above us, and there were living creatures also under the surface of the Earth. And giant land was far out beyond the outer ocean. And somehow I don't think that was ever quite worked out in detail how that would eventually emerge with the sky.
No. But I mean, they were right on several fronts. There are creatures living beneath the earth and beneath the sea, and there is land on the other side of this big stretch of water. So
but perhaps not giant land, though.
No, you're correct about that. Perhaps not giant land, but land.
I've always wondered, and I suppose this isn't maybe your area of specific expertise, but when it comes to the giant land, is it possible that that's just different races of people that they've never really interacted with? So let's take I guess like Africa versus Scandinavia. There's this land mass where it's just people are so probably culturally different, visually different, so they get this term, maybe this like Jotun, that's this is other, rather than it necessarily being like a mythological being. It's just a way they describe these different cultures they don't know of. The same, I guess, with interactions they would have had with Asia. They know there's this land there, and they're different.
It's tricky again when we come to this question of the interaction between mythology and what we look upon as reality. And I think perhaps we should look at this mythology first, and then mythology is at all times used by individuals here on Earth to explain what they see in the real world. And it's because it seems to be a widespread notion of the world that this is how it is built up. So the setting that we have in the Edda, that we humans, we live here on the earth, and on the outside is the ocean. And these creatures that are constantly threatening us, they are beyond, and it's the job of the gods to keep them there. So the gods are on our side, and we are trying to lead our organized life somehow, be that organized in many different ways, inside the protected area where the gods are on our side, and the enemies are on the other side. So this is just a universal, it seems, mythological setup. And except it seems that in Australia and in Africa south of Sahara, but it's so vague that it's so tricky whether we can actually make that distinction. But it's certainly not something that we can try to understand in just terms of the reality of people in Scandinavia. It's much wider idea than that, and it seems to be fairly stable also. that the gods, there are several generations of gods, about as many as we experience alive as earthlings. So there are great-grandparents and grandparents and parents and children. So in the mythological world, again, a reflection of the family, like we see it.
Okay.
So the family of Donald Duck is very stable. With a few generations, and doesn't change, even though we grow older, they are always the same. And it's the same with the mythological families. They remain stable, and we just have new generations of humans interacting with them.
Yeah, okay.
And there's a constant battle always between the world we are trying to build and the outer forces that are trying to threaten us, be they natural elements or enemy cultures of the humankind, or even dangerous animals. There are all kinds of dangers that can threaten the stable life that we are all aiming at all times. So instability is the stability of through the ages, and we are always trying to balance, and that is the world of the myths reflects that. There's a constant battle between good and evil, and we fear that in the end everything will collapse, but we are always postponing it generation at a time. But on an individual basis, of course, we all meet our Ragnarök as individuals, but as a culture, it remains and waits for the next generation, or has been postponed up to now anyhow.
That's so interesting, because obviously one for us, I guess, is climate change, that idea that we have this impending doom that we can postpone through bettering our actions. So things never changed. We still have these things today, even though it's a more tangible thing and it's not a story. It's still that idea of there's this thing, this doom that's there, and we have to put it off and put it off.
It's just the way we are programmed somehow. So it's very easy. It's what we fall upon when we talk about things. We use this pattern and this terminology. Also, if you read just modern physics about the Big Bang theory and the vocabulary they use to explain the beginning of the world in the modern accepted ideas in physics, the terminology is very similar to what Snorri uses in explaining the big void and Ginnungagap and how the world came about. So it's just the vocabulary we have hasn't evolved that much to talk about these big issues.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I wonder if that ingrained kind of action is also part of what's made humans so successful. Because obviously humans are flawed. We've done horrendous things, but as a species, we've been pretty successful when it comes to, doing what species do. We've taken over, I guess, most of the planet, however you look at it. But we've built cities, we've built technology. It's an incredible thing. We're often very harsh on humans because we do some quite horrible things. But if you step back and look away from that, it's impressive what humans have managed to build. And I wonder if that plays into this mindset of always having an impending doom, so you have to overcome it and keep working. There's no staleness there. It's you have to keep progressing, and that never-ending evolution, because it's bettering yourself.
I don't know if I have can really know the answer to that, but I know that if we look at the myths, we see that the characters that we have in the mythology, not just in the Norse, but in mythologies globally, there are these different types of individuals. And we know that the gods, they are not round characters. So they stand for something. Mm-hmm. They stand for strength, they stand for wisdom, they stand for this, that, and the other, fertility. And there is, in mythologies of the world, there is a deep analysis, not just of the visual sky, what is happening there, and the movements of the planets and the dome, the heavenly dome, but also just the nature of us, mankind. You have all the different characters that just psychologists use to analyze us today. They are already defined and analyzed in the mythologies. So these traditions, talking about stableness, they mediate and keep alive our understanding of everyone around us. So how people are different, and psychological problems, sexual issues, transgender issues. This is all embedded in the mythology. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the nature of Odin being sort of not of a quite certain sex is also reflected in the idea of him being Mercury. And the reason why Freddie Mercury chose Mercury as his artistic name is, of course, from astrology, that Mercury has this dual role in the astrological symbolism. Yep. Because it turns the left or right side from our perspective towards the sun. So everyone can see with their bare eyes that it looks different depending on where it is relative to the sun from sin from earth. So, and that makes him playing this transgender role in mythological tales. That's why Odin is the way he is, and why his name is used for Mercury. So it's all the ideology, all the analysis, all the understanding of the many traits of human nature is presented, analyzed, and kept alive in the myth. So when the myth is used about something untrue or silly, I think that is the utmost folly of modern times, when they think that myths are false. They're, I think, the most right, perhaps, or correct stories that we have, even though they may not be so factually, historically correct on anything. But about the human nature, they are spot on.
That's so fascinating.
Perfect. Gísli, I could sit and talk with you for 4 hours, as you said earlier, but we've been here an hour, and I do want to let anybody that's watching ask some questions if they have any. I feel like most people will just be sat there in their own heads trying to contemplate everything they thought they knew. But let's wrap up the main show, and then we'll just do an extra 10 minutes if you've got time.
Oh yeah.
Perfect. Gísli, this has been amazing. I've loved this. I love these episodes that make me just rethink everything and sit quietly in contemplation that I know will sit with me after we finish as well. So please do come back in the future, and we can do this again.
Oh yeah, we can go through other things as well, and
absolutely.
More even. I think there is plenty of space to maneuver about this. How accurately they are representing the past.
Yeah,
and what what we can sort of do with that idea, if this is indeed what is happening in the Edda, that Snorri is reflecting how he understands the sky above him, just mediating the current terminology in his time.
Yeah.
Then again, we come back to this answer. Well, it's totally authentic about how people were thinking in the 13th century about what was in front of them. And then we can say, well, more or less the same thing was in front of people 200, 300, 400 years, 500,000 years earlier.
Yeah.
So what did then change? Wasn't the same or very similar worldview just continuously being passed on? And again, the details of that worldview would have been kept alive by an elite, like the elite poets. And that is again where the idea of elitism from the Irish comes in, that you have a class of individuals responsible to keep this knowledge alive, and not just as an astronomical knowledge or for timekeeping, but because the images from the mythology were essential to understand the court poetry.
Yeah.
So it was part of their work, if they wanted to understand the older poetry and be able to compose in that style, they had to know the myths.
Yeah.
So it had nothing to do with believing in them or practicing pagan rituals. They had to know this world of stories to be able to perform this kind of poetry and create the images that they were doing. So that's why it's so difficult to use it for purposes of reconstructing something that we would call religion in pre-Christian times. Because it's we can think of it as the paintings in all the art galleries that are using the Bible as a source for motifs. And when people are no longer reading stories from the Bible or practicing Christianity, they go to art galleries and they have no idea what is on those pictures. And then they have to have it explained to them. Oh, this is this story from the Bible where so and so is doing this, that, and the other. And then, at least within the elite of art historians, they have to keep a knowledge of these stories from the Bible alive in order to be able to interpret what is there. But the general public perhaps may be totally ignorant and just go and see the pictures. Well, that's a nice picture, without knowing much more about it.
Seeing the depths and the layers.
Yeah, and that is probably what was going on in the art of skaldic poetry, that this small elite of professional poets, they kept the mythology alive, but the public gradually became less well informed and lost track of that knowledge.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to get into that more deeply. One other time.
Next time we will get in. Yeah, I look forward to that so much. Gísli, do you have any public facing kind of social media that you would like to send anybody to, or your books, anything like that?
Of course, I have my medieval Icelandic saga and oral tradition from 2004. That is available online at Harvard University Press. So, and then I have some articles on academia.edu.
Okay. Yeah.
And I have some of the articles on this celestial skyscape, and and some other articles, of course, and my book on the Gaelic influence from 1988 in a second updated version from 2000 is available there also.
Great.
So
wow.
So and then there is a book in Icelandic that would, and my Edda edition is of course in Icelandic only. So, but there are also English articles there in about the Edda.
For me,
yeah.
Well, I'll admit that I don't read Icelandic fluently. I'll have to have you up for
now
some
with Google
yeah.
Translate and AI translating machines, anyone can just put a PDF into their computer and get a text in their own language out.
That's true.
I wonder how accurate that is, though.
Not quite very accurate, but it gives you a general
impression.
Idea.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, Mags, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at ArcheoMags, Archeo with a K.
Perfect. And then for me, it's Daniel_Farrand1, Horns of Odin for the business, and then Nordic Mythology podcast across the board. Go and check us out on YouTube. Hit the little subscribe and little bell button.